What? The apocalypse had arrived, and I was the last man on Earth? I was lounging in a luxury villa, spending my days in bliss with the goddess I'd been pining over for years. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs as I scanned my surroundings. I was still in my cramped rental room. A long sigh escaped me as reality set in. It was just a dream, but it was such a perfect dream that I couldn't help but savor the memory. For some unknown reason, most of the world's population had vanished, leaving the city in total chaos, crawling with savage zombies and mutated beasts. In that world, I was the only man left. While facing a life-or-death struggle against the undead, my eyes had suddenly mutated. I gained X-ray vision and a photographic memory that acted like a high-speed scanner, recording everything I saw into a mental cloud drive. Even my past 20 years of memories resurfaced with perfect clarity. In the dream, just as a zombie was about to tear my throat out, the moves from a Muay Thai action movie I'd watched recently flashed through my mind. With those brutal explosive techniques, I cut through the undead like a god of war and managed to save my roommate Su Hui. Su Hui was a freshly graduated yoga instructor with porcelain skin and a perfect figure. Her curves were legendary, the kind that made your heart skip a beat just by looking at her. Plenty of rich second-generation heirs had tried to win her over, but she had a heart of ice and a rock-solid moral compass. She turned them all down without a second thought. Yet, in the apocalypse, my powers and charm finally won her over. I was just about to enjoy the rewards of my heroics when the dream ended. Damn it, why does it always stop at the best part? Even though I was wide awake, I pulled the covers over my head and forced my eyes shut, desperate to slip back into that beautiful fantasy. Then, my alarm went off. It was 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes until I had to be at work. I sighed again, knowing that while dreaming was great, being late was a death sentence for my wallet. I gave myself a quick pep talk, washed up, and headed for the elevator. Something felt off. Usually, the elevator was packed at this hour, but today was empty. Since my office was close, I walked as usual, but the streets were eerily quiet. It was Monday, yet there wasn't a soul in sight. I wondered if everyone had suddenly achieved financial freedom and quit their jobs. As I walked further, things got weirder. Cars were left all over the road in a messy way. My heart began to race as a single thought took hold. The end of the world. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I just needed to focus on work, but then I stopped. A car parked nearby was shaking violently. I thought it was a bit much for someone to be doing that so early in the morning, but then a woman came running toward me. She was stunning, with a perfect physique that reminded me of a more refined Kardashian. It was Su Hui. I called out to her asking why she was running so fast and if she'd forgotten something at home. She screamed at me to run. She was in her tight gym gear, and the sheer speed of her movement was a sight to behold, but the terror in her voice was real. I asked if it was an earthquake, but she didn't have time to explain. She reached me and told me we had to get back to the apartment immediately. Before I could ask anything else, I saw them. Two figures were chasing her from 20 meters away. They weren't human. Their skin was deathly pale, covered in blood, with blackened eyes and rotting flesh. They looked exactly like the zombies from the movies. Just as the realization hit, the door of the shaking car beside me swung open. A massive man crawled out, his face pale and bloodied, with what looked like intestines hanging from his mouth. My legs went weak with terror. Su Hui grabbed my arm and yanked me away, snapping me out of my trance. We sprinted toward our building. I asked her through ragged breaths how this could be happening. She told me she didn't know. She had just stepped outside when those things started chasing her. Suddenly, I stopped. Two more zombies were blocking the path ahead. With enemies on both sides, Su Hui spotted a black pickup truck parked nearby with the door open and the keys in the ignition. She jumped in and tried to start it. Watching her, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. I wondered if I was still dreaming. I blinked hard, hoping my eyes would mutate like they did in the dream, but nothing happened. I didn't have X-ray vision or a photographic memory. I couldn't even remember what brand of toothpaste I'd used that morning. The engine roared to life. Su Hui waved at me to get in, and as I looked at her, a golden light flashed across my vision. Suddenly, her gym clothes vanished from my sight, leaving her incredible figure completely exposed to my eyes. My vision really had mutated. I wiped a stray bit of blood from my nose, feeling a surge of excitement. Su Hui noticed my staring and snapped at me to get in the car. I suppressed my excitement and jumped into the passenger seat. She slammed the gas, but the truck wouldn't move. The tires just spun and smoked. Looking in the side mirror, I saw the 2-meter-tall zombie holding onto the back of the truck, pinning us down. Su Hui panicked. We were surrounded by 5 zombies, and it looked like the end. I looked at her, a smirk playing on my lips as the Muay Thai moves from that movie flooded my mind. I mastered them instantly. Su Hui saw my expression and grew angry, thinking I was looking at her with some base instinct because I thought we were about to die. She scolded me, asking if I cared about my life at all. I didn't say a word. I just opened the door and stepped out. She begged me to come back, thinking I was being reckless, but I ignored her and slammed the door. I walked straight toward the giant holding the truck. She kept shouting, calling me weak and telling me I was going to die, but then she went silent. I leaped into the air, driving my elbow down like a mountain onto the giant zombie's head. Its skull split open, and it collapsed into the dust. I stood there in the haze like a god of war. For a moment, Su Hui looked at me as if I were the hero she'd always dreamed of. I walked back to the car and leaned against the window, looking into her eyes to tell her how I felt, but she cut me off with a warning. The two zombies from the front were closing in. I met them with a high kick that sent one flying. They were tough though and kept coming back. I managed to kick the arm off one of them, but it didn't slow them down. Meanwhile, the other two were smashing the truck windows to get to Su Hui. Hearing her scream, I ignored the pain in my body and smashed my elbow into a zombie's skull, killing it instantly. I realized then that the head was their only weak point. As I processed this, another one bit deep into my thigh. I roared in pain and crushed its head with my elbow. I dragged my bleeding leg to the truck, just as the glass shattered and the last two zombies reached for Su Hui. I swung my fists like sledgehammers, caving in their skulls until they stayed down. I asked Su Hui if she was okay. Even with my powers, my body was still human and I was badly hurt. More zombies were approaching in the distance. I wanted to keep fighting, but she stopped me, insisting we go home so she could use her first aid kit on me. Once we were back in the apartment, she helped me onto her bed. It was soft and carried her scent, making my head spin. For the first time, I was inside her room. My body reacted instinctively to her proximity. She returned with the medical supplies and asked about my wound. I told her I was fine, but when she went to disinfect my leg, she froze, her face turning bright red. I realized my body had betrayed my thoughts. Embarrassed, I pulled a quilt over myself and closed my eyes, unable to explain. She hesitated, but since I'd saved her life, she gritted her teeth and began cleaning the wound. Then, she gasped and told me to look. I opened my eyes and saw the bite mark on my leg healing at a visible rate. Even the scrapes on my elbows were vanishing. I felt a new surge of strength coursing through me. Not only had my eyes changed, but it seemed my entire body had mutated too. I activated my X-ray vision and scanned my own body, noticing something incredible. My cells possessed a powerful fusion capability. They were actively devouring and merging with the zombie cells, absorbing their unique traits in the process. I had a sudden, bold realization. My power wasn't just vision, it was total integration. My eyes fused images, my brain synthesized knowledge, and my body assimilated the biological characteristics of other organisms. Beside me, Su Hui looked on in total shock, asking how my wounds had healed so suddenly. I played it cool, laughing it off, and telling her I wasn't entirely sure. I suggested it was like Spider-Man. Being bitten by something strange caused a mutation. I didn't dare mention the X-ray vision. If she knew I could see through everything, she'd probably run out of my sight and never look back. To keep her from digging deeper, I quickly shifted the subject, suggesting we try to contact our families to see if anyone else survived. As we moved, I tried to recall that strange dream, searching for clues about why the world had collapsed overnight. Was I really the last man? Were there other women out there? But the memory was fading like mist, and the more I pushed, the more my head throbbed. I could only remember one thing clearly. The world was filled with more than just zombies. They were mutated beasts, each more savage than the last, and surviving here was going to be anything but easy. Su Hui checked her phone and turned pale, reporting that the internet was down. I told her to try a regular call, but those wouldn't go through either. I tried my own device with the same result. Everything was cut off. I looked up at the elegant chandelier still glowing above us and managed a wry smile, noting that at least the water and power were still working for now. The words had barely left my mouth when the room plunged into total darkness. Su Hui rushed to the kitchen and twisted the tap, but after a few pathetic drops it ran dry. The gas stove was dead too. No signal, no water, no power. Society had completely paralyzed. Outside, the streets were crawling with zombies and monsters. Without special abilities, no one would last long out there. Su Hui peered through the balcony windows, trembling as she counted over a dozen zombies wandering through our complex. I walked up behind her and pointed out that the fridge was empty. If we didn't find supplies, we'd be starving by tonight. She looked at the ghouls below, her voice trembling as she asked what we were going to do. I told her not to worry. There was a shopping mall nearby. I asked her for 2 hours to warm up in my room, promising that I'd head down to get food and take care of her. Seeing her standing there in a daze, I felt a sudden surge of boldness. I leaned in, planted a quick kiss on her cheek, and retreated to my room before she could react. Once inside, I savored the lingering scent of her perfume for a moment before turning to my computer. I needed to find action movies or zombie films immediately to download more combat data into my brain. My current mutations allowed me to handle standard zombies, but if I ran into a high-level beast, I'd be in trouble. I usually watch suspense or romances, and while I liked fantasy, those moves were too flashy for real survival. With the internet down, I had to rely on my hard drive. I searched through my archives, but my heart sank. I had over 100 movies, but they were almost exclusively adult action films. I sighed, realizing those would be great for later when I finally won over Su Hui, but they were useless against the undead. It was a classic mistake. You never have the right research material when you actually need it. Then I remembered that Su Hui practiced boxing alongside her yoga. She was bound to have martial arts films on her drive. I rushed into the living room to ask her, but I stopped dead in my tracks. She was on her yoga mat mid-routine. She was positioned on all fours, stretching one leg high into the air, her silhouette perfectly framed against the light. I couldn't help myself. I activated my vision, quietly admiring the fluid, graceful lines of her body as she moved through various poses. Before I knew it, a warm trickle of blood escaped my nose. Su Hui heard me move and turned around, telling me she was warming up too. She wanted to come with me, arguing that there was strength in numbers. I wiped the blood away and feigned composure, asking if she had any action movies on her drive. She looked confused for a second, so I clarified. Martial arts or zombie flicks. She admitted she found horror movies too scary, but she did have one film called The Wing Chun Master. I asked if the lead could fight, and she told me he could take on the entire martial arts world alone. I asked to borrow it to learn the movements. She copied the file for me and even handed over a pair of butterfly swords, explaining they were specialized Wing Chun weapons. I thanked her and went back to my room to study. The movie was a masterclass. I learned that Wing Chun wasn't just about fist techniques, it involved mastering the butterfly swords and the long staff. The protagonist used those blades to cut through enemies and save a beautiful woman. A story I found very relatable. I memorized every strike and footwork until they were ingrained in my soul. With these blades, I told myself I would harvest the lives of the zombies and the heart of Su Hui. I grabbed the twin swords and walked back to the living room, telling her it was time to move. Suddenly, a heavy pounding hit the door. I hoped for a survivor, but the sound was too aggressive. I checked the peephole and felt my blood run cold. 4 zombies were huddled in the hall, looking even more decayed and demonic than the ones before. Their faces were rotting away, bone visible through the flesh. I told Su Hui we were surrounded and that we couldn't stay here anymore. The zombies would eventually track us by scent, and their numbers would only grow. I asked if she had any weapons in her room, and she emerged a moment later with an aluminum baseball bat and a stylish cap. A draft from the window caught her hair, making her look incredibly sharp and attractive. I pushed the thought down, stepped in front of her, and told her I'd take the lead. She nodded obediently. I reminded her to aim for the head and avoid getting bitten at all costs. She gripped the bat, lowered her stance, and prepared for a fight. I threw the door open, and as a zombie lunged, I swung the butterfly sword, taking its head off in one clean motion. I told her to stay close and not to worry. I carved a path through the hallway, breaking through the encirclement until we reached the elevators. Even with the power out, the dual-circuit emergency system was still running. A nearby emergency stairwell was crawling with more ghouls. I told Su Hui to call the elevator while I held the line. Standing at the entrance to the stairs, I felt like a legendary guardian. My strength and reflexes were beyond anything I'd ever imagined. I cut down every monster that approached, but their numbers were like a rising tide. Su Hui called out that the elevator had arrived, but as the doors slid open, a zombie lunged from the car toward her throat. She screamed, trapped. With a flick of my wrist, I threw one of the butterfly swords. It whistled past her shoulder, grazing a strand of her hair before burying itself in the zombie's skull. I lunged forward, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her into the elevator, slamming the close button just as the horde reached us. The silence of the elevator was heavy. I was still holding her, my breath hot and ragged against her ear. It was the closest I'd ever been to a woman, and Su Hui seemed to feel the tension too. She bit her lip and gently pulled away, her face flushing as she thanked me. I told her it was my job, since we might be the last 2 people left. I had to protect her to keep the human race going. The Ice Queen turned beet red at that. She looked at me differently now, seeing a hero where she used to see a shy roommate. The atmosphere in that confined space was electric. I stared at her, ready to finally confess my feelings with a simple promise. I'll take care of you. I worked up the courage and stepped toward her. She looked back, her breathing hitching. I leaned a hand against the wall, clearing my throat to speak, but the doors chimed and opened to a lobby full of zombies. I cursed my luck, gripped my remaining sword, and grabbed Su Hui's hand. I went into full slaughter mode, taking heads with every swing until we reached the black pickup truck outside. I shoved her into the passenger seat, took the wheel, and slammed the gas. We roared out of the complex, smashing through the undead blockades without hesitation. Su Hui watched me drive with a quiet, happy smile, clearly won over by the raw edge I developed. We soon arrived at Wanjialai, the city's largest shopping center. It was a 5-story hub, luxury goods on the first floor, home and gym gear on the second, groceries on the third, restaurants on the fourth, and a cinema on top. Su Hui might have been conservative at heart, but she was still a woman. When she saw the LV bags gleaming in the window, she couldn't help herself. She charged right in. This is a limited edition. There are only 12 of these in the entire world. She quietly set the bag back in its place. It was too expensive. Even if she slaved away for 3 years, she could never afford it. I stepped in front of her with a cool, sweeping gesture, my voice carrying a trace of newfound authority. I told her that the entire mall had been contracted to me now. I looked her in the eye and said that since she was my woman, she could take whatever caught her eye. My words seemed to snap her back to reality. This was the apocalypse. Whether the owners of these bags were even alive was a mystery. It wasn't just the mall. The entire world had lost its sense of order. Still, her moral compass flickered. She hesitated, wondering if it was really okay to just take things. She had always believed in hard work and earning her way, and even in the end times, taking things without paying felt inherently wrong. I reassured her that in this new world, these items were masterless. Whoever claimed them owned them. She hesitated for only a second longer before pulling the bag to her chest, her eyes sparkling. The lingering terror from the earlier zombie encounter seemed to vanish in an instant. I told her plainly that in the apocalypse, the strong rule. I promised her she could take whatever she wanted while I kept the zombies at bay. Overwhelmed with gratitude, she couldn't help but plant a kiss on my cheek before diving back into a shopping frenzy. I touched the spot where her lips had met my skin, watching her enjoy herself. I couldn't help but muse that a new bag really was the best medicine for any ailment. After we cleared out the LV store, she moved to La Mer, sweeping up high-end skincare products worth tens of thousands that had once been out of her reach. Soon, a third of the pickup truck's bed was overflowing with luxury bags, cosmetics, clothes, and lipsticks. She showed no signs of stopping and was about to charge into Chanel when I finally intervened. I pointed out that we needed to prioritize food. If we kept loading up on clothes, we wouldn't have any room left for essentials. She agreed immediately, and we headed for the stairs. As we passed the second floor, my eyes caught a direct shop. A thought began to form, and I told her there were fitness and sporting goods on this level where I could find some weapons. I suggested she head to the third floor for food while I grabbed what I needed. I waited until she reached the next level before ducking into the shop, my heart hammering with a mix of excitement and nerves. It was my first time in a place like this. I quickly found an ultra-thin variety, tearing off the outer packaging while glancing around, terrified she might walk in on me. I stuffed a few dozen individual packs into my pockets and hurried out toward the gym equipment. After a quick search, I grabbed a pair of nunchucks and then snagged a sharp kitchen knife from the cookware section next door. Armed and ready, I headed up to find her. Su Hui had already packed over a dozen bags with instant noodles, vegetables, meat, eggs, water, and fruit. Ever since I merged with the zombie genes, my strength had become immense. I carried over a dozen heavy bags between both hands without feeling the slightest bit of fatigue. I told her we had stayed long enough and needed to find a secure place to hide. She nodded, grabbed 2 bottles of yogurt, and followed me back to the truck. A horde of zombies was already closing in. I didn't hesitate, slamming the pedal to the floor and breaking through their line as we sped eastward. I suggested we check out the Tianlong Lake District. She looked at me in surprise. That was the most prestigious villa area in the city, home to the ultra-wealthy, including a rich heir who had once tried to court her. I told her with a smile that those villas, just like the bags, were likely masterless now. As we drove in, we passed countless luxury cars and supercars worth millions. But the streets were empty. There weren't even signs of a zombie struggle yet. We passed various styles, from traditional Chinese courtyards to modern Western villas with massive glass walls, but I kept driving. They were all too fragile, too easy to breach. Finally, at the deepest part of the complex, I saw it. A villa that looked more like a fortress, sitting on a vast lawn. It looked incredibly solid and secure. I felt a surge of excitement, telling her it was a perfect defensive position. I asked her to wait in the car while I scouted the interior. I parked on the lawn and approached the door, butterfly sword in my right hand, kitchen knife in my left, and nunchucks tucked into my belt. I called out to see if anyone was home, and after receiving no answer, I pushed inside. The interior was grand, decorated with oil paintings, a fireplace, and classic furniture. Every detail was exquisite. After checking every room and confirming we were alone, I headed back to the truck. I told her the place was safe and that we'd be staying there. She followed me inside, looking at the opulence with a bit of unease. She asked what would happen if the original owner returned. I told her we'd worry about that if they were actually lucky enough to make it back. While I moved our supplies inside, she sat on the sofa, letting the softness ease her tension. Once everything was secure, I locked the heavy doors and walked toward her. My presence seemed to stir a different kind of tension in her. She had begun to accept me, drawn to my newfound charm, but the idea of giving up her long-guarded secret garden made her hesitate. She wasn't just unsure, she was afraid of the unknown pain of a first time. I sat beside her, my hand resting on the sofa just a fraction of an inch from her leg. As the air between us grew heavy, a soft voice suddenly broke the silence from a radio sitting in the corner of the room. A voice was asking if anyone was there, pleading for a response. Su Hui breathed a sigh of relief and pushed me away, telling me to check if it was another survivor. I hesitated for a moment before picking up the receiver. I asked who was calling, and the voice replied that it was Dr. Tong Yan from the Supernatural Research Institute, begging for rescue. I was stunned. I asked if it was really the legendary, enigmatic Dr. Tong Yan. Su Hui stood up, her excitement matching mine. She noted that if it was her, we might finally learn why the world had ended. In our world, Tong Yan was a household name, the only person outside of celebrities who could dominate the news. She had appeared 3 years ago and revolutionized technology, yet no one knew what she looked like. Journalists and netizens had searched for years without finding a single trace. The only clue was a leaked audio clip of her voice, magnetic, gentle, and utterly captivating. People guessed she was a teen genius, or a 70-year-old with a young voice, or even a man using a voice changer. Regardless, she was a goddess to every man in the country. She had even topped a top 10 goddesses poll by a landslide. She was a mystery that every man wanted to solve. For me, she sat on a pedestal right next to Su Hui. Su Hui urged me to go save her, but I told her to wait. No one knew where the Supernatural Research Institute actually was. My hand shook slightly as I held the microphone. Talking to the nation's goddess was a dream for any man, and I realized I was the one she was reaching out to. Then, a thought hit me. I was the only man left. In a way, this world belonged to me now, which meant Tong Yan likely belonged to me too. The nerves vanished. Why be nervous talking to my own woman? I cleared my throat and spoke with the tone of a master of the world, telling her to give me her location so I could come get her. She told me the institute was hidden beneath the zoo, with the entrance located in the staff lounge of a small coffee shop called Green Cup near the gates. Before she could finish, she let out a soft scream, and the signal cut out. I shouted into the mic asking for more details, but there was only static. Su Hui was frantic, saying something must have happened, and that we had to leave immediately. I stayed silent, lost in thought. I remembered my dream. The zoo wouldn't just be full of zombies, it would be teeming with mutated beasts, each one a nightmare. Going there was a suicide mission. I had finally found safety and a goddess to spend my life with. I wasn't eager to throw it away. When Su Hui asked what I was thinking, I told her the truth, that the animals in the zoo had likely mutated into things far more terrifying than zombies. She asked if that meant we were just going to leave the doctor there. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. I told her that as the only man left in the world, I had to take responsibility for protecting it. I felt a twinge of regret after saying it, but the look of pure admiration in her eyes made it worth it. I told her it was too dangerous for her to come along. I instructed her to stay home, stay safe, and prepare a bowl of my favorite pork noodles. I promised I'd be back by the time the noodles were ready. I grabbed a cleaver from the table and tucked it into my belt. The sheer aura I was projecting seemed to captivate her entirely. I made a joke about ancient heroes and strode toward the door. I told her to lock up and focus on the cooking while I went to bring the doctor home. Under her watchful gaze, I drove the pickup away, the engine roaring. As I navigated the chaotic streets, I couldn't believe the things I had just said. Was I just showing off, or was there a hero's dream buried deep inside me? I didn't know, but I felt different. All my life, I had been a follower, obeying teachers, then obeying bosses. I had always been the one taking orders, but now, a voice inside me whispered that I was the master of this world. From this moment on, I had to be the one giving orders and taking charge. If I wanted to survive and protect what was mine, I had to be proactive. My blood began to boil with a strange excitement. I pulled out my phone and played an old favorite. A Man Should Better Himself. As the familiar stirring melody filled the cab, the hero's dream that life had crushed out of me was fully reborn. I drove the truck with reckless abandon, crushing every zombie and beast in my way, until the gates of the zoo appeared before me. I had worked myself into a complete frenzy. I kicked the truck door open, phone in my left hand and cleaver in my right, ready to paint the zoo red. But to my absolute shock, the place was eerily silent. Forget mutated beasts. There wasn't even a single zombie in sight. What a letdown. All that hype for nothing. I let out a frustrated sigh, cut the music and tucked my phone away. Gripping the cleaver, I began a slow, cautious trek toward the Green Cup coffee shop. The decor was surprisingly chic and untouched by any signs of a struggle. Stepping inside felt like walking into a lush green oasis. It was the kind of place that usually made you feel full of hope and positive energy, the perfect spot for a quiet latte. But something was wrong. Abnormalities are usually a sign of trouble. I didn't let the cozy atmosphere lower my guard. I stayed alert, scanning every shadow as I moved through that sea of green toward the staff lounge. In my dreams, the smaller beasts were the most terrifying. They were masters of stealth, possessed insane speed, and carried claws or fangs that could snap a neck or tear out bone in a heartbeat. My breathing grew tight as I maintained total focus. Reaching the back of the shop, I found a small corridor past the restrooms. There it was, a door marked Staff Lounge. My eyes lit up and I reached for the handle, but a strange sound from behind stopped me cold. A cat meowed, but it wasn't a normal sound. It was a high-pitched, miserable wail that sounded like a crying infant. It was the kind of noise that sent a shiver straight down your spine. I turned toward the source and saw a cat stepping out from the restroom. It was pitch black with eyes that shone like dark pearls, gleaming with a cold light. Blood stained its mouth, its body was arched, its tail held high. It was coiled like a spring, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I didn't blink. After a brief standoff with the black cat, I lunged into the lounge and slammed the door shut just as a massive thud hit the other side. The metal plating on the door bulged inward. If it had been wood, those claws would have shredded it instantly. The cat began relentlessly battering the door, and soon 2 more cries joined the chorus from outside. It was calling its pack. I had no time to waste. I immediately began tearing the room apart looking for the entrance. The layout was basic: a computer desk with an ancient desktop, a sofa, a table, and a cabinet. Tong Yan had said the institute was underground, which meant there had to be a trapdoor somewhere. I got down on all fours and searched the floor, but I found nothing. The iron door was starting to give way, the meows outside growing more frantic. There had to be a way. Sweat pooled in my palms. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves and looked around again. My gaze finally landed on that prehistoric computer in the corner. A high-end secret facility wouldn't keep junk like that unless it was a front. I tried to boot it up, but it was dead, completely frozen. A claw suddenly punched through the metal door, swiping at the air inside. These cats weren't like the slow-moving zombies. They were lightning fast. If 3 of them cornered me, I was dead. In a moment of pure desperation, I slammed my hand onto the keyboard. It lit up. The keyboard was the key. I scrambled to enter a password. I tried the full name of the institute. Wrong. I tried Tong Yan's name. Wrong. I tried the initials. Still wrong. With a final crash, the door flew open. The black cat and 2 snow-white companions stepped in, tails raised and fangs bared, stalking toward me with murderous intent. I tried a few more combinations, but nothing worked. As they closed the distance, I decided to play a final card. I typed in the pinyin for Protect World Peace as a last-ditch effort while gripping my cleaver for a suicide charge. To my shock, a pleasant voice chimed in my ear. Password correct. Welcome to the Supernatural Research Institute. The floor vanished beneath me. After a long drop, I hit an air cushion and rolled to a stop. I stood up and looked around. The power was out here too, leaving a long corridor bathed in the eerie green glow of emergency lights. The silence was broken only by the distant, muffled wails of the cats above. I used the last of my phone's battery to turn on the flashlight. Cleaver in one hand, phone in the other. I crept forward. The passage ended in a T-junction. As I debated which way to turn, a violent pounding erupted from the right, followed by a soft, panicked voice. It was Tong Yan pleading for someone to stay away. I sprinted toward the sound. Rounding a corner, I saw 2 zombies in lab coats frantically battering a door. That had to be her. Seeing they were just ordinary zombies and not beasts, my anxiety eased, replaced by a surge of curiosity. What did the legendary Tong Yan actually look like? I found myself hoping she was my age. Someone who could add some color to this bleak apocalyptic life. I just hoped she wasn't some old man with a voice changer, or my trauma with cute voices would be permanent. I quickly shook the thought away. According to Murphy's Law, the more you worry about a scenario, the more likely it is to happen. The door groaned and gave way. Man or woman, it didn't matter right now. Saving a life came first. I charged into the room with terrifying speed. With 2 swift strokes, I ended the zombies. Their skulls shattered, spraying a mist of blood across my face as they slumped to the floor. In the corner, I saw a figure in a white lab coat. They were incredibly thin, huddled with their knees pulled to their chest, trembling violently. I felt a wave of relief. At least it was a woman, but for a second, I hesitated to look closer. I was afraid of being disappointed. Experience told me that names and appearances rarely match. The quietest named people are usually the loudest. As I stood there, she seemed to sense my presence and slowly looked up. My heart skipped a beat. My experience had failed me. She was exactly what her name suggested. Her face was like a porcelain doll, beautiful beyond words, as if kissed by an angel. Even through the lab coat and white shirt, her elegant, slender silhouette was undeniable. She was thinner than Su Hui, but her figure was just as breathtaking. Being a hot-blooded hero was clearly starting to pay off. I smiled and stepped forward to pull her out of the darkness, but she met me with a piercing scream for help. She recoiled, trembling even harder. I told her not to worry, that I was there for her, but she only screamed louder for me to stay away. Confused by her reaction, I caught a glimpse of myself in my phone's front camera. I let out a sharp curse. I looked like a monster. The blood from the zombies had covered my face in a gruesome mask. No wonder she was terrified. I quickly ripped a piece of cloth from one of the corpses and wiped my face clean. I told her we had just spoken on the radio and that I had come to save her. She stopped screaming and looked at me properly. My face was clean and human, nothing like the rotting ghouls she'd been hiding from. She asked who I was. I told her my name was Chin Hao and that I was here to rescue her. I spoke patiently, reassuring her that I was human and that zombies didn't talk. Seeing her guard drop, I knelt beside her and asked if there were any other survivors. She shook her head, her mind clearly in a daze. Extreme terror can shut down a person's ability to think, leaving only raw survival instinct. I asked if she had seen any colleagues when she arrived this morning. She told me she had been in the lab all night and fell asleep from exhaustion. When she woke up, everyone was gone and the place was crawling with zombies. She had locked herself in and started calling for help. She sounded fragile, her exquisite face pale. The sight of her sparked a deep protective instinct in me. I told her it was okay now and that I would protect her, but we needed to leave. I stood up, but she didn't move. She remained huddled in the corner. I warned her that the zombies would track our scent and that we were in danger. She looked up with tear-filled eyes and admitted her legs were too weak to move. I told her it wasn't a problem and that I'd carry her. I tucked my cleaver away and reached out a hand. She hesitated, reaching out before pulling back the moment her skin touched mine. Being a genius who lived in the lab, she had clearly spent very little time with the outside world, especially men. Her body seemed to reject the contact out of instinct. She seemed more afraid of the physical contact than the threat of death, telling me to just go on without her. I assured her I wasn't a bad guy, but when she still wouldn't move, I took charge. I grabbed her hand and put my arm around her waist to haul her up. She made a soft sound of protest, but she was too weak to resist. In a life or death situation, there was no time for modesty. I turned and swung her onto my back, my arms locking around her like pliers to make sure she wouldn't slip. She was so delicate and overwhelmed by the double terror of the zombies and the physical proximity that she just went limp against me. The wail of a cat echoed through the corridor again. I asked her if there was another way out, since the coffee shop was already surrounded by beasts. She nodded fervently, her body trembling against mine. I told her to point the way and I would carry her out. She pointed a slender finger forward, guiding me through the sprawling, maze-like underground structure. The facility was a mess of narrow corridors and rooms, filled with high-tech equipment, much of it smashed by whatever had broken in. I hadn't gone far when several staggering zombies lunged out from a side passage, blocking our path. "Be careful," Tong Yan warned me, her voice trembling as she instinctively locked her arms around my neck. I didn't feel a shred of fear. I drew the cleaver from my waist with my right hand, while my left supported her, ensuring she wouldn't slip. I became a human juggernaut, charging through the corridor and carving a bloody path through anything that stood in our way. Because of my speed, Tong Yan was jolted against my back with every stride. I could feel the rhythmic pressure of the movement, and I noticed her porcelain skin flush from a snowy white to a deep crimson. It was a strange sensation for her, no doubt, but the terror that had consumed her moments ago was being replaced by an overwhelming sense of security. Slowly but surely, her body stopped fighting the proximity, and her breathing began to steady. She pointed to the left, and I pivoted instantly. With her guidance, we burst through a final exit and found ourselves in a sprawling parking lot filled with heavy shipping containers and massive trucks. She pointed toward a red Mercedes heavy-duty truck, telling me to take that specific one because her equipment was inside. I nodded, sprinted to the vehicle, and hoisted her into the passenger seat before climbing into the driver's side. We tore out of the hot zone, leaving the nightmare behind. Once we were clear of the chaos, Tong Yan finally relaxed. She looked at me, her gaze soft and voice gentle as she thanked me. I gave her a small smile, telling her that as a man, it was simply what I had to do. I promised her right then that I would keep her safe. She nodded quietly, a visible warmth spreading through her expression. We arrived at the villa shortly after. Su Hui, who had been stationed at the third-floor window like a sentry awaiting my return, lit up with joy the moment she saw the truck. She sprinted down to meet us as I hopped out of the cab. Seeing me alone at first, she looked worried, asking if I had come back by myself. I gave her a confident, slightly smug grin, telling her that Brother Hao never returns empty-handed. On cue, the passenger door opened and Tong Yan stepped out, introducing herself with a polite greeting. Su Hui was stunned into silence. She had tried to imagine what the legendary doctor looked like, but the reality surpassed any fantasy. Tong Yan looked like she had stepped out of a masterpiece. Her features were perfect, and her skin showed absolutely no trace of age. I introduced them, jokingly referring to Su Hui as my private trainer. Su Hui gave me a playful roll of her eyes before introducing herself as a yoga instructor. If Su Hui represented peak sensuality and fire, then Tong Yan was the embodiment of gentle, fragile elegance. Looking at these two world-class beauties, and knowing I was the only man left to appreciate them, made my heart race. I suggested they go inside to rest, warning them that the area was still dangerous, and zombies could appear at any time. Su Hui asked what I would be doing, and I explained that I needed to unload the supplies Tong Yan required. Tong Yan gave me a brilliant smile, calling me a hero. I headed to the back of the truck while they went inside. Inside the cargo hold, I found 9 wooden crates, each sealed with tape marked top secret. Knowing how important these were to someone of Tong Yan's stature, I didn't waste time. I began hauling them into the basement one by one. As I reached for the final crate, I spotted a heavy black briefcase tucked in the corner. It was secured with 6 combination locks, looking far more precious than the crates themselves. I grabbed it and brought it down with the rest. The villa's basement was massive and clean. After organizing her equipment and locking up the truck, I headed back upstairs. My clothes were caked in dried zombie blood, and I realized I needed a change. I remembered seeing a walk-in closet during my initial sweep of the house, and went to see if anything fit. Just as I pushed the door open, I ran straight into Tong Yan, who had just finished changing herself. She had swapped her lab coat for a black spaghetti strap dress. The simple, noble cut revealed her perfect collarbones and shoulders, making her pale skin look almost translucent. There was an unintentional air of mystery and allure about her. Seeing the heat in my gaze and feeling my breath so close, she lowered her head. In her characteristically gentle voice, she told me not to throw my bloody clothes away, as she needed the blood as research material. Then she hurried past me. I watched her walk away, admiring her perfect silhouette before changing into a fresh t-shirt and shorts. Dinner is ready. Su Hui emerged from the kitchen carrying bowls of noodles. Her tight gym gear was gone, replaced by an oversized blue-gray t-shirt that just barely covered her. The hem swayed as she walked, offering fleeting, distracting glimpses that made my imagination run wild. I took the bowl from her, looking from the gentle beauty on my left to the fiery one on my right. Suddenly, a familiar warmth trickled from my nose. Tong Yan, ever the scientist but clearly inexperienced with the ways of the world, immediately grabbed a tissue to help me wipe it away. I laughed awkwardly, blaming the dry weather and heat for the nosebleed, though I silently cursed my lack of self-control. Su Hui teased me, suggesting it wasn't the weather that was dry but my heart that was parched. I played along, joking that with two flames as bright as them nearby, anyone would overheat. Tong Yan didn't join the banter. She was staring intently at the tissue, observing the blood with a professional eye. She noted that zombie blood carries a virus and that she had seen it enter my eyes and mouth during the fight. Yet my body hadn't changed, and my blood color remained perfectly normal. To her, this was a massive scientific anomaly. She scrutinized me with those clear, intelligent eyes. I felt a jolt of alarm. I hadn't expected her to pick up on my physical changes so quickly. She hypothesized that I might have a hidden talent and tucked the tissue away, declaring it an important research sample. Wanting to keep my abilities a secret for now, I quickly shifted the topic, asking her for her take on why the world had ended so abruptly. Su Hui chimed in as well, noting that in movies, the apocalypse is usually a slow process. She couldn't understand how everyone had vanished and been replaced by zombies in a single night. Tong Yan thought for a moment before suggesting that it might be a case of parallel universes colliding, leading to a space-time leap. Su Hui looked lost. As an art student, physics had never been her strength. Tong Yan explained the theory that there are multiple identical worlds distributed along a timeline. If they collide, people from one world can be leaped into another. Essentially, the people we knew hadn't vanished. They might just be in a different version of Earth, while we, or a few of us, had ended up here. Su Hui asked if we could go back. Tong Yan said it was possible, provided we found the coordinates and the right transport. I asked the question that worried me most. Could others break into our world too? She confirmed it was possible. This meant our world was vulnerable to invasion. We had plenty of resources but zero defense. If a squad of well-armed mercenaries dropped in, they could easily take over, and I had no intention of letting anyone else become the king of my world. I asked where the zombies came from. She explained it from an energy perspective, suggesting that a specific type of radiation or energy could cause human mutations, turning them into low-level creatures driven by instinct. She added that these creatures could undergo high-speed evolution into high-level zombies. She was confident and composed while discussing science, a complete contrast to her usual fragile self. Hearing her analysis, I decided I needed to hit a library and catch up on some reading. I needed to bridge the intellectual gap if I ever hoped to win over a woman like her. Fortunately, with my scanner-like eyes and database-driven brain, learning was as easy as breathing. I could become a top-tier scholar overnight if I wanted to. The thought made me burst into a sudden triumphant laugh. The room went silent. Both women were staring at me coldly. To break the awkwardness, I addressed her as Dr. Tong Yan again. She stopped me, saying it felt too distant and suggested I call her Sister Yan instead. We were both taken aback. Looking at her, she seemed like the youngest of the three. With her doll-like face and flawless skin, anyone would believe she was 18. I hesitated, then told her I had a question that might be a bit impolite. When she told me to go ahead, I asked the one thing every guy in the world wanted to know. Exactly how old was she? 37. Su Hui and I shouted in unison. The impact of that number was massive. She didn't look a day over 20, let alone nearing 40. Age aside, I pushed further, asking if she was married. She told us she wasn't. She had started at the institute very young and rarely interacted with men. In fact, she admitted to having a natural fear and distaste for the opposite sex. My heart sank. There were only 2 women left in my world. One was afraid of pain, and the other had a phobia of men. But for the sake of humanity's future, I knew I had to persevere. Then, she changed her tone. She admitted that when I carried her out of the institute, she realized men might not be so terrifying after all. She felt safe on my back. She went back to her noodles, complimenting the meal. I felt a small wave of relief. It proved that no obstacle was insurmountable. Eager to build on that momentum, I asked her what was in the crates I had moved. Tong Yan set her chopsticks down, her expression turning somber. She looked at me, hesitating before stating that the contents were a matter of the highest level secrecy. I've been researching this project for nearly 10 years now. We were supposed to start the next phase of experiments today. There might have even been a major breakthrough. Tong Yan spoke with a heavy trace of regret in her voice, but she quickly shook it off. She noted that since the world had already ended, these secrets weren't really secrets anymore, so there was no harm in telling us. Her words immediately piqued Su Hui's curiosity. I could see her wondering exactly what kind of project could consume a decade of a genius doctor's life. Tong Yan sighed again, mourning the 10 years of effort that had seemingly gone to waste. Without a massive team for support, she knew she couldn't continue such a gargantuan project alone. I couldn't help but press her, asking what the project actually was. She explained that the crates contained a specific type of energy body. According to her theory, humans and all matter are essentially energy bodies that emit various waves. She used love at first sight as an example, explaining it as a resonance between two people whose wave frequencies are similar or perfectly synced. I nodded slowly, casting a meaningful look at Su Hui. She just rolled her eyes and told me to pay attention to the lesson. Tong Yan continued, explaining that 10 years ago, her team detected an ancient species deep on the ocean floor. They lived in colonies with a single leader and subordinates who obeyed every command with absolute 100% precision. It was an anomaly that simply shouldn't exist in nature. I chimed in, noting that survival of the fittest usually meant whoever was strongest became the king, and total loyalty was unheard of in the animal kingdom. She confirmed that their behavior defied natural laws, which was why they studied them until they found the answer. It turned out these creatures carried unique energy stones. The leader held a prime energy stone, while the subordinates held secondary energy stones. The leader could manipulate the prime stone to emit a specific wave, controlling the secondary stones and by extension the actions of the entire colony. I asked how many subordinates a leader could control, or how far the range extended. She admitted that the limits were still unknown and that she would need further research to provide a definite answer. My mind started racing when I asked if these stones could be transplanted into other species. She revealed that the first experiment was actually scheduled for this morning, but then the world fell apart. While she spoke with regret, I felt a surge of silent excitement. If I had the power to devour and integrate the prime energy stone while transplanting the secondary stones into zombies, I could build a formidable zombie army. These creatures were mindless, powerful, and durable, the perfect combat machines. I remembered my history teacher once saying that organizations usually collapse from internal betrayal rather than external enemies, but with total control, an invasion wouldn't just be repelled, it would be the foundation for something greater. I could see it clearly, the Great Qin Group. I could practically hear people calling me Boss Qin. Every man dreams of ruling, doesn't he? To own the land, command the people, and have the finest beauties by his side. The thought of such absolute dominance made my blood boil with anticipation. I grew up an orphan with no sense of belonging, working a dead-end job for a pittance. I always felt like a background character in someone else's story, but the apocalypse had given me the chance to be the hero, the savior. If I didn't seize this opportunity, I'd be a fool. The excitement became too much, and I let out a sudden laugh. Su Hui and Tong Yan both stared at me in confusion. Su Hui even gave me a playful kick, asking why I was so happy when Sister Yan's life's work had just been derailed. I apologized and asked if the prime stone could be transplanted into a human. Tong Yan's answer was a blunt no. She told me a colleague had tried to steal it once, only to turn to ash the moment they touched it. The secondary stones could be processed into a liquid and injected, but they seemed to have no effect on humans. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Despite my powers, I only had one life. If devouring the prime stone meant turning into a pile of ash, it was a gamble I wasn't ready to take. I asked why it worked that way, and she hypothesized that secondary stones might only work on animals with less developed brains, as human brain waves likely interfered with the stone's signals. She then asked where I had put her equipment and stones. I told her they were in the basement, and she immediately headed down to set up a temporary lab. Before she disappeared, she looked back and told me to go out and catch a few zombies for her to test on. Just like that, the future Boss Qin was demoted to a zombie catcher. To make matters worse, Su Hui told me to wash the dishes before I left so she could go organize her new clothes and cosmetics. I sighed and got to work. Apparently, being the king of the world meant taking care of the two ladies of the house first. As I scrubbed the plates, the blueprint for the Great Qin Group stayed etched in my mind. Life and death are small matters compared to becoming a hero. Some risks are worth taking. Once the kitchen was spotless, I left the villa to begin my hunt. I decided the Mercedes truck was too conspicuous, so I scouted the neighborhood for a better vehicle. There were plenty of high-end sports cars, but their low chassis made them useless for plowing through zombies. Eventually, I spotted a towering Hummer H1. It was wide, powerful, and had a metal partition between the front and back seats, perfect for transporting bound test subjects. I grabbed the essentials from a nearby hardware store: rope, chains, steel pipes, and heavy-duty tape. Then, I drove to an area where the zombie density was lower. Even with my increased strength and speed, I knew I had to be efficient. You never know when the next crisis will hit. I parked around a corner and spotted a small group of 3 zombies. I stayed low, confirmed there weren't others nearby, and then lunged out with a heavy sledgehammer. 3 swings, 3 shattered skulls. Then I realized, Sister Yan probably wanted them alive for her experiments. I got back in the Hummer and looked for a lone target. Luck was on my side when I saw a female zombie with long hair wandering by herself. She was different. Her face wasn't rotting at all. She was wearing what looked like a university uniform. A t-shirt, a short skirt, over-the-knee black socks, and white canvas shoes. Despite the grime, it was clear she had been a campus belle. As the belle turned her blood-red eyes toward me and lunged, I leaped into the air, hammer raised. But seeing her face, I hesitated. She looked like a fallen angel, making it hard to strike. That split second of hesitation cost me. She managed to scratch my arm. She was strong, but that only made it more interesting. I blurred behind her and delivered a measured strike to her neck, knocking her to the ground. Before she could recover, I pinned her down and tied her hands. She struggled, trying to kick me, but I made short work of her legs as well. I taped her mouth shut and used a strip of cloth as a blindfold before bundling her into the back of the Hummer. I admired my handiwork, feeling quite proud of how quickly I was learning the ropes of the new world. But as I went to climb into the driver's seat, a familiar sound stopped me. A cat meowed. I looked over and saw the same black cat from the Institute. It watched me with cold, glassy eyes. I've never liked cats, mostly because one scratched me when I was a kid, and they always seemed too cold and detached. I decided right then that since I needed a beast for the doctor's experiments, this cat would be the one. In a tight space, the cat would have the advantage, but out here in the open, its agility was its only defense. I taunted it, swinging my hammer lightly. The cat arched its back, ready to strike. I threw the hammer first to flush it out. It leaped into the air, actually using the midair hammer as a stepping stone to launch itself at me like a black arrow. Its speed was incredible. I reacted quickly, using my hand like a blade to strike it in the stomach, sending it flying 10 meters. However, the cat managed to tear a chunk of flesh from my wrist before it landed. My wound began to heal almost instantly, but I was impressed. A strike like that would have shattered a zombie's skull, yet the cat seemed relatively unharmed. I realized I had to either kill it quickly or wear it down to capture it. I chose the latter. I didn't want to waste a good specimen, and a cat was much easier to store in the villa than a massive mutated beast. I wrapped a heavy chain around my right fist, turning it into a makeshift iron mace. The cat lunged again. I met it strike for strike, hammering it into the ground over and over like a baseball player. After a brutal struggle that left me covered in scratches, the cat was finally spent. It let out one final miserable cry, seemingly preparing for a last-ditch attack. I called out to the black cat, my fighting spirit rising as the battle intensified. My wounds were knitting themselves back together almost as soon as they appeared, and with every cycle of healing, I felt my body growing noticeably stronger. Sensing my provocation, the feline launched itself at me like a black arrow once again. I knew it was at its limit. Staying calm, I gripped both ends of my heavy iron chain and waited for the impact. As it lunged, I feigned a retreat before suddenly driving forward, snapping my arms wide to wrap the cold metal firmly around its neck. It let out a desperate, wretched cry, clawing fruitlessly at the air, but I wasn't about to give it a second chance to escape. I moved my hands in rapid circles, winding the links around its body as if I were coiling a ball of yarn, until the creature was nothing more than a growling ball of chain. I couldn't help but chuckle at the sight, thinking that the maneuver had a bit of a Tai Chi flair to it. I really was a natural when it came to learning. I tossed my prize into the backseat of the car and let out a long breath. My current tools were far too primitive. If I had long-range capture gear or high-tensile netting, this would be much more efficient. I sat in the driver's seat and began planning my next move. I needed to get to the downtown library as soon as possible, specifically to find texts on weapon forging. If I wanted to hunt more of these zombies and mutated beasts in this new world, I was going to need some creative cold weaponry. The cat wasn't taking its captivity well, thrashing violently despite the chains. While the bell was easy enough to manage, the cat's raw explosive power made it difficult to study safely, so I decided I needed a proper cage first. I drove over to a nearby slaughterhouse, a place filled with cages of all sizes, once meant for livestock. Now abandoned and eerily silent, it was the perfect place to scavenge, though I knew I shouldn't linger in such a grim spot. After finding a cage of the right size, I hauled it into the truck and headed back to the villa. I arrived home carrying the bound bell over my left shoulder and the caged cat in my right hand, making my way down to the basement. Tong Yan had already transformed the space, clearing it out and filling it with high-end experimental equipment that looked incredibly sophisticated. Seeing her there in a black-strap dress and white gloves, focused intensely on her instruments, gave her a completely different, captivating aura. I announced my return, and Su Hui soon followed us down. While I was out, she had been busy organizing all her clothes and cosmetics, even managing to tidy up 3 of the bedrooms. She might not have had Tong Yan's genius for science, but her life skills were on an entirely different level compared to a doctor obsessed with technology. When Su Hui walked in and saw the way I had bound the school bell, she turned a deep shade of red, clearly taken aback by how professional the rope work looked. I gave her a sheepish smile, trying to explain modestly that I didn't actually have any experience and had just tied her up that way out of necessity. Tong Yan looked up from her work, noting that while the binding was outside her field of expertise, she could sense an almost artistic quality to the technique. I thanked her for the compliment, secretly thinking that I really ought to teach her a thing or two about this particular skill when I had the chance. Su Hui must have read my mind through my expression, because she immediately landed a light punch on my chest, telling me to be respectful to Sister Yan. Tong Yan, meanwhile, approached me with a test tube, explaining that she had analyzed my blood. She told me it was remarkably special, possessing the ability to devour foreign cells and substances, and concluded that I was a rather excellent test subject. The word test subject sent a chill through me. Living with a woman this obsessed with research meant I never knew what kind of chaos she might cook up next. She reached for a syringe, saying she needed to draw another tube of blood for a more detailed analysis. I laughed it off, reminding her that I was the last man on Earth and far too unique to be used as a mere guinea pig. She remained perfectly calm, telling me it didn't matter. If the world truly needed a man for repopulation, she could just clone my cells without much difficulty. I tried to protest, but she insisted she needed another tube, then another, claiming the first wasn't quite enough. Finally satisfied, she told Su Hui to get me a bottle of yogurt to help me recover, as she might need more from me later. Su Hui left with a mischievous grin while I sat in the corner of the lab, clutching my sore arm with a cotton swab and shivering at the thought of such a cold, logical woman. Suddenly, I felt a massive surge of energy. I turned to see a small, egg-sized stone glowing with a faint blue light, resting on a black stand. Next to it were several tubes filled with a thick, matching blue liquid. It was beautiful, like a diamond unlike anything I had ever seen. I reached out to touch it, and though Tong Yan cried out for me to stop, it was too late. She sounded genuinely worried, as if she were already preparing to start that cloning process. I panicked, trying to pull my hand away, but the stone began to shrink right before our eyes, merging directly into my body. Within 10 seconds, it was completely gone. Tong Yan stood there with her mouth agape, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. The stone was incredibly hard, resistant even to lasers, yet I had absorbed it entirely. In all her years at the Institute, she had never seen anything this world-shaking. Her 10-year project, which she thought was lost, had just reached a groundbreaking breakthrough because of me. She wondered aloud if it was the devouring quality in my blood that allowed this to happen. Excitedly, she rushed at me with the syringe again, eager to see the changes in my cells. I cried out as she took another tube, and then another, her interest in me reaching a fever pitch. Su Hui walked back in with the yogurt, and hearing my desperate shouts, she just grinned and offered to go get a second bottle. For the first time, Tong Yan wasn't just looking at me as a person. She was looking at me with the raw hunger of a scientist who had finally found the ultimate mystery. I felt a searing heat wash over my body, prompting me to activate my X-ray vision to scan my own anatomy. I watched as faint blue streaks of liquid mingled with my crimson blood, before they vanished entirely, merging into my very cells. The ancient biological leader who originally held the Prime Energy Stone had never fully tapped into its potential, which explained the flaws in its control over its subordinates. I, however, had achieved a 100% of a brain's capacity, versus the full 100%. Tong Yan stood before me, gripping my chin and tilting my head back to observe me with clinical intensity. Since I was taller than her, my gaze naturally drifted downward, catching the view of her neckline and ivory skin. The proximity was dangerous, and the scenery was too beautiful to ignore. I couldn't resist teasing her, asking if she was currently speaking to her test subject or to a good man named Chin Hao. She was undeterred, stating flatly that she only cared about her experiment. I let out a sigh. Trying to flirt with a woman this focused on science was like hitting a brick wall. She ordered me to open my mouth, and I complied with a loud ah. She leaned in so close her eyes were practically pressed against my lips, searching for any internal tissue changes. I joked that if she got any closer, she'd definitely get a reaction out of me. It's strange, she muttered to herself. The fusion is complete. She decided to move on to the next phase, preparing to inject a secondary energy stone into a zombie to test the effects. She drew 1 milliliter of the shimmering blue liquid and injected it into the campus bell. The girl let out a guttural roar. It's time, I said, closing my eyes to focus on the power of the Prime Energy Stone. Wait, Tong Yan interrupted. When I asked what was wrong, she explained with total seriousness that her equipment was very expensive. If the experiment failed and the zombie took control of me, she didn't want her machines damaged. I asked if she wasn't worried about me getting eaten, and she simply replied that I could be cloned. I was speechless. Resigned to my fate as a replaceable asset, I hauled the campus bell into the next room and unshackled her. She lunged at me like a wild horse, her eyes vacant and bloodshot. I instinctively dodged, but suddenly, I felt an invisible thread snap into place between us. Driven by the Prime Energy Stone, I closed my eyes and projected an image from my mind to hers. To my surprise, she stopped attacking. Instead, she began performing an incredibly provocative, bold dance, the kind of routine popular among streamers to tease their male viewers. I was enjoying the show until I caught sight of Su Hui and Tong Yan standing side by side, yogurt bottles in hand, watching me with expressions of pure disdain. I cleared my throat and quickly switched the mental feed to a sequence of Muay Thai head-crushing strikes. The bell immediately dropped the act and became a cold, lethal weapon, executing a flawless set of 36 Muay Thai forms. Once I cut the connection, she stood perfectly still like a deactivated robot. I turned to the ladies, asking for their thoughts. Tong Yan was ecstatic, admitting she thought I'd only managed simple movements, not this level of perfect synchronization. She looked at me like a starving wolf eyeing a prime steak, appearing ready to strip me down for a full study then and there. I shared her excitement. This meant the Great Qin Group was becoming a reality. I suggested we try the serum on the black cat to see if I could control mutated beasts as well. Tong Yan nodded and injected a milliliter into the cat. The black cat wailed, claws out in a final display of defiance. But as the reagent took hold, the screams turned into soft, gentle purrs. Its cold, murderous gaze vanished as it flopped onto the floor. The savage beast had transformed into a cuddly pet. Unless you looked into its eyes, you'd never know it was a killer. Su Hui, a known cat lover, couldn't resist picking it up. She asked if it had a name, and since it didn't, she decided to call it Little Black after a pet she had lost years ago. I successfully maintained control over both a bell and a cat simultaneously. I asked Tong Yan how much serum we had left. She estimated about 300 milliliters, though she could refine up to 1,000 later. 1,000 milliliters meant 1,000-strong zombie army. Fearless, powerful, and nearly indestructible. When I asked how many subjects I could control at once, Tong Yan gave her usual cautious answer, saying she needed more research. However, she noted that while the original host could theoretically control 1,000, she estimated I might manage around 100 given the difficulty of multitasking a human brain. I decided that practice was the only way to find the truth. We hopped into the Hummer H1 and headed out to the streets to hunt. The 100 milliliters were used up in no time, and to Tong Yan's shock, I controlled the 100-strong horde with zero effort. It didn't even feel like I was close to my limit. She fetched another 50 milliliters, and I used those too, making the entire zombie army perform a synchronized robot dance in the middle of the street. She marveled at me, declaring that she needed to study me thoroughly tonight. Su Hui, holding Little Black, looked on in awe. Ever since the apocalypse began, I had become a literal treasure chest of surprises, constantly shattering her expectations. I suggested we test my range next to see how far they could go before I lost control. Tong Yan guessed 2,000 meters, assuming I would outperform the original host's 1,000-meter limit. Half an hour later, the results were in. 30,000 meters? Tong Yan was beyond stunned. A control radius of 30 kilometers was unthinkable. I couldn't help but feel a surge of dominance, thinking to myself that from this day forward, everyone within a 60-mile radius would have to call me father. It's incredible, Tong Yan said, her shock tinged with a hint of admiration. Su Hui added that I seemed to be getting stronger by the minute. I looked at both of them and jokingly suggested we celebrate tonight. Tong Yan completely ignored the hint, turning to Su Hui to ask if I had shown any strange traits when we were roommates. Su Hui admitted I had always been unremarkable until today, guessing that I had just been keeping a low profile. As night fell, I decided it was time to head home. Driving a luxury beast of a car, with 2 stunning women and a loyal army of death following behind, felt like the royal treatment. I started laughing out of pure joy until the ladies gave me another look of disapproval. Back at the Tianlong Lake Villa, I stationed the 100 zombies as guards. Surrounding the complex, it was a spectacular sight, like an entire battalion was stationed there. My only concern was their one weakness, the head. I made a mental note to fashion reinforced helmets for them to make them truly invincible. For dinner, Su Hui worked her magic again. Earlier she had been worried about rationing, but knowing I could now command a horde to get whatever we needed, she was much more generous with the ingredients. Tong Yan, despite her slim frame, turned out to be quite the foodie. Her previous life was so consumed by research that she rarely ate properly, but the security I provided allowed her to finally relax and enjoy herself. The 2 women got along famously, constantly praising each other's intelligence and beauty. I felt incredibly lucky. Stable internal affairs are the foundation for any great conquest. I joked that since I was the only man left, if I didn't marry them, who would? Tong Yan remained clinically objective, pointing out that in a space-time leap, thousands of survivors could be scattered across the globe. I challenged her theory, noting that I had already proven her previous data wrong. I reminded her that she wanted to study me tonight and asked when we should head to her room. She took me literally, saying she didn't have her equipment in her room. Su Hui whispered something in her ear, and Tong Yan's face turned bright red. She stood up abruptly, claiming she was tired and would see us tomorrow, then hurried upstairs with a plate of food. I turned to a smirking Su Hui, teasing her for ruining my fun. She told me she was full too, and that I should get to the dishes. She informed me my room was on the 3rd floor, and that the 2nd floor was strictly for her and Tong Yan. During the day, they praised me like a god, but at night, they couldn't get far enough away. Still, Tong Yan was right about one thing. The world was big, and others could be hiding in the shadows. To build the Great Qin Group and remain the sole overlord, I needed knowledge that I could turn into combat power. I'm a man of action. I locked the doors, packed some water and gum, and stationed the bell and little black at the entrance. Then I picked 18 of my strongest zombies and drove the Hummer to the library 20 kilometers away. I knew I could still control the zombies at the villa from that distance, so the girls were safe. I reached the library and stepped out of the car, only to freeze in my tracks at what I saw. Standing before the library was a massive drop-shaped object. It rose over 10 meters high with a diameter of 7 or 8 meters. Its surface coated in an impossibly smooth black substance that radiated high-tech sophistication. I stared at it, wondering if it was some kind of spacecraft. My instincts told me it was a flight vehicle. I couldn't help but wonder if people from another world had discovered this place. I cautiously sized up the black droplet, keeping my distance. In an instant, I commanded the 18 zombies to fan out and surround the object completely. Just then, a hatch materialized on the hull. A blonde woman with blue eyes, clad in a tight black leather suit, stumbled out. She took only a few steps before collapsing onto the ground, losing consciousness. I didn't let my guard down, fearing a trap. I ordered 2 zombies to approach the mysterious woman. They tested her for a reaction, but she remained limp, so they hoisted her up and dragged her before me. I asked who she was, but she stayed motionless on the pavement. Activating my X-ray vision, I scanned her thoroughly. Beneath her alluring curvaceous frame, I saw bruises and welts as if she had just survived a brutal struggle. What struck me most was a black rose tattooed at the base of her spine. She looked like a dangerous character. "Water, I need water," the blonde woman suddenly spoke. I hesitated for a second before grabbing an open bottle of mineral water from the car. She was too weak to move her hands, so I held the bottle and slowly poured the liquid into her mouth. Driven by a raw survival instinct, she abandoned all poise, tilting her head back to drink greedily. As she drank, I observed her closely. Her features were incredibly delicate, and her gaze possessed a seductive quality that didn't lose out to Su Hui's at all. But where Su Hui was a noble, icy beauty, this woman was pure temptation. There was a shimmering light in her eyes that reminded me of a fox spirit from the movies. After finishing the bottle, her strength seemed to return slightly. She gasped for air and asked who I was and where she had landed. I'm a kind person by nature, and seeing someone vulnerable made me want to tell her the truth. But just as the words reached my lips, a concept flashed through my mind: the Dark Valley Law. It was a rule from a famous sci-fi novel I'd read. It suggested that when walking through a dark valley, if you hear a sound, you should fire toward it immediately to kill whatever made it. You can't tell if the other party is a friend or a foe, and preemptive action is the only way to survive. I had already scanned her and knew she wasn't carrying any weapons or anything unusual. Moreover, this was my territory and I possessed extraordinary powers. I wasn't afraid of her hurting me, but for my own safety, I couldn't give away my true identity. I cleared my throat and spoke coldly, telling her that this world belonged to the Great Qin Group, and that I was the man in charge, Boss Qin. I informed her that she had trespassed onto my land and was now my prisoner. I demanded to know why she was here, giving her 3 seconds to answer before I declared her execution. I stood over her, my expression grim. "Don't kill me, Boss Qin. I'll do whatever you want." Her voice was incredibly sultry as she slowly raised her head, her eyes brimming with a seductive, lingering charm. She grabbed my leg to pull herself up, pressing her body against mine. Because we were so close, I caught a whiff of a very peculiar fragrance. It was intoxicating, almost making me feel drowsy, but a sudden chill in my mind snapped me back to full alertness. At that moment, the blonde woman moved, reaching out to choke me. She was fast, but far slower than I was. I caught her wrist, twisted it behind her, and slammed her against the side of the truck. I told her coldly that she was far too green to try and match speeds with a metahuman like me. "What? You're a metahuman?" Hearing her use that term made me pause for a beat before I regained my composure. I could tell from her tone that she was terrified of metahumans, so I decided to bluff. I confirmed that I was indeed a metahuman and that my speed was triple that of a normal person. I told her her little scheme stood no chance against me and demanded her origin. I gave her 3 seconds to think. 3. Metahuman Lord, please don't kill me. My name is Scarlet. I'm an agent from Planet X314. I fell into deep thought at her words. She really was from another planet. If I wanted to survive and thrive, I needed to understand the current state of the universe. To keep her talking, I lied and said I was also from X314, though it had been a long time since I left. I ordered her to tell me exactly what was happening on that planet, warning her that I'd kill her if she lied. Scarlet noted playfully that my grip was too strong and that I was hurting her. At the same time, that strange fragrance tried to seep into my system again. I snorted and tightened my grip, telling her to stop her little tricks or I'd lose my patience. She let out a soft cry, promising she wouldn't try it again. She called me her master and asked me to let go, promising to tell me everything she knew. Looking at her lithe body pinned under my hand, I felt my blood stir, but I suppressed it. I told her this was her last chance not to disappoint me. I slowly released her. Scarlet knelt obediently before me, calling me a noble metahuman and offering herself as my slave. I told her to cut the nonsense and start talking. Having such a beauty kneeling there made my mind wander, and I couldn't help but scan her again, specifically the black rose on her spine. I reminded myself she was a rose with thorns. Since I was willing to take her in, she addressed me as master and explained that Planet X-314 had changed drastically, becoming a wasteland. Metahumans like me, possessed of great power, had taken over and become the rulers of the world, living in luxury while the vast majority of ordinary people struggled to survive in the chaos. I asked coldly why she had come here. She explained that she was an agent from the state of San Antonio, tasked with transporting prisoners to a space jail orbiting X-314. Mid-flight, the ship malfunctioned, and she woke up here to find me. I stared her down and asked if there was anyone else on the ship. My sudden question made her flinch. She hesitated for a second before claiming there was no one else left.